Have you ever made a simple, clumsy mistake that should have gotten you killed, but instead uncovered a multi-million-dollar underworld conspiracy? This isn't some Hollywood script. This is the terrifying, pulse-pounding saga of Clara Jenkins, a late-shift waitress working in a discreet Chicago steakhouse, whose life changed forever the second a tarnished silver locket slipped from her neck. Standing over her was Gabriel Russo, the undisputed, ruthless head of the Midwest Syndicate. He didn't pull a weapon. He didn't order his men to drag her away. Instead, he stared at the tiny photograph inside her broken necklace, went completely pale, and whispered 6 words that froze the entire room. "That's my dead brother's face. Stick around, because the twists in this story will absolutely blow your mind. To understand how Clara Jenkins found herself in the crosshairs of the city's most dangerous crime family, you have to understand the ecosystem of the Sterling Cut." Nestled discreetly in the River North Gallery district of Chicago, it wasn't the kind of restaurant that advertised. There was no neon sign, just a heavy mahogany door and a strict, unwritten dress code. Clara had been working there for 3 years. At 24, she was drowning in her late mother's medical debt, nearly $60,000 of it. The Sterling Cut paid in cash, and the tips from the city's corrupt politicians, hedge fund managers, and underworld elites were enough to keep the collection agencies at bay. Clara was a ghost in a crisp white apron. She knew the golden rule of high-end hospitality: see everything, hear everything, and say absolutely nothing. It was a blistering Tuesday night in mid-October when the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The general manager, a usually composed Swiss man named Henrik, rushed through the swinging kitchen doors, his face the color of skim milk. He clapped his hand sharply. "Table 88, private dining room. They just pulled into the alley," Henrik stammered, pointing directly at Clara. "Clara, you are on service. No eye contact. Do not linger. Pour the Barolo, serve the tomahawks, and get out." Table 88 was an urban legend among the staff. It was a reinforced, soundproof room in the back, strictly reserved for Gabriel Russo. Gabriel Russo wasn't just a mobster. He was a phantom. At 32, he had taken control of the Russo syndicate after a violent internal war that had left his father and his younger brother dead 5 years prior. Gabriel was known for his cold calculation, his immaculate tailored suits, and a notoriously short temper. He didn't leave witnesses, and he didn't forgive mistakes. When Clara pushed the heavy oak doors open to the private dining room, carrying a tray of imported Italian water and crystal glasses, the air was thick with the smell of Cuban cigars and metallic tension. 6 men sat around the circular table. At the head sat Gabriel. He was strikingly handsome, but in a predatory, chilling way. Dark hair swept back, sharp jawline, and eyes as cold and grey as a winter storm over Lake Michigan. He was speaking in hushed, rapid Italian to a man with a scarred neck. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she approached the table. She kept her eyes glued to the white linen tablecloth. "Just pour the water." "Just do your job," she chanted in her head. But fate, as they say, has a twisted sense of humour. Underneath her uniform, Clara wore a cheap, heavy silver locket. It was the only piece of jewellery she owned, a rusted antique with a broken clasp that she had temporarily fixed with a tiny piece of wire. Inside was the only photograph of the man she had loved, a man she had lost a year ago, a man who had vanished into thin air, leaving her nothing but this locket and a broken heart. As Clara reached across the table to place a glass in front of Gabriel, her foot caught on the thick, plush edge of the Persian rug. She didn't fall, but she lurched forward. The sudden, jerky movement was too much for the flimsy wire holding her necklace together. With a sharp snap, the chain broke. The heavy silver locket plummeted from her chest, hit the edge of Gabriel Russo's crystal water glass with a sharp clink, and bounced directly onto the pristine white tablecloth in front of the Mafia boss. The impact popped the ancient latch open. The silence in the room was instant and absolute. The hushed Italian conversation ceased. 5 large men in tailored suits stopped moving, their hands subtly dropping below the table, hovering over concealed weapons. Clara stopped breathing. The blood drained from her face, leaving her dizzy and nauseous. She had just dropped personal property onto the plate of the most feared man in Chicago. I am so sorry, Mr. Russo," Clara stammered, her voice barely a whisper. She reached out, her hand shaking violently, to retrieve the necklace. "I'll get out of your way." "Don't touch it," Gabriel commanded. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that sent a shiver straight down Clara's spine. It wasn't loud, but it carried the absolute authority of a man who decided who lived and who died. Clara snatched her hand back, as if the locket were on fire. Gabriel leaned forward slowly. His grey eyes fell upon the open locket. For a second, his expression was an unreadable mask of stone. Then, Clara watched in real time as the feared mob boss broke. The colour vanished from Gabriel's tanned face. His breathing hitched, a sharp, audible intake of air. His hands, previously resting casually on the table, suddenly gripped the armrests of his leather chair so hard his knuckles turned bone white. He reached out with a trembling index finger and gently touched the tiny, faded photograph housed inside the left panel of the silver heart. It was a candid, slightly blurry photo of a young man with a crooked smile, laughing under a neon street lamp. Gabriel looked up, his eyes locking onto Clara's. The cold, dead stare was gone, replaced by a storm of violent confusion, grief, and undeniable fury. "Where did you get this?" Gabriel demanded, his voice dropping an octave. It's mine," Clara choked out, stepping back, bumping into the wall. One of Gabriel's men, a massive enforcer named Dominic, stood up, kicking his chair back. "Boss, you want me to handle her?" "Sit down, Dom," Gabriel roared, the sudden explosion of volume making Clara flinch. Gabriel stood up slowly, towering over the table. He picked up the delicate locket, holding it by the broken chain, as if it were a holy relic. He walked around the table, closing the distance between himself and the terrified waitress. He stopped inches from her. Clara could smell his cologne, bergamot, cedar, and something inherently dangerous. "I'm going to ask you one more time, sweetheart," Gabriel said softly, the danger in his tone palpable. "Who gave you this necklace?" My fiancé," Clara cried, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "His name was Theo. He gave it to me a year ago, right before he disappeared." Gabriel's jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle ticked in his cheek. He held the open locket up so the photograph was inches from Clara's face. "His name wasn't Theo," Gabriel said, his voice cracking with an emotion that sounded terrifyingly close to a sob. "That's Matteo. That is my younger brother, and he died in a car bombing 5 years ago." The world tilted on its axis. Clara stared at Gabriel, her mind misfiring. "No!" Clara shook her head frantically. "No, you're wrong. That's Theo. I met him 2 years ago. He worked at a bookstore in Logan Square. We lived together in a studio apartment. He loved me." "My brother died," Gabriel said, stepping closer, crowding her against the flocked wallpaper of the private dining room. "I identified the body. I buried him. So unless you're telling me you date ghosts, you are lying to my face, Clara." He knew her name. The realization sent a fresh wave of panic through her. Of course he knew her name. Men like Gabriel Russo knew everything. "I'm not lying," Clara cried out, desperately digging into the pocket of her apron. Gabriel's men drew their weapons, the metallic snick of safeties being switched off, echoing in the room. "Stand down," Gabriel barked without looking back. "Let her speak." Clara pulled out her phone, her hands shaking so badly she dropped it twice before finally unlocking the screen. She opened her photo gallery, scrolling frantically to her hidden, favorited album. She thrust the screen toward Gabriel's chest. "Look," she pleaded. "Look at the dates. Look at him." Gabriel took the phone. For 2 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the room was the heavy breathing of the mobsters and the faint, muffled jazz music bleeding in from the main dining room. Gabriel swiped through the photos. There was Matteo, older, his hair grown out, a small scar above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there 5 years ago. He was making pancakes in a tiny kitchen. He was kissing Clara's cheek at a snowy Christmas market. The timestamps on the photos read from exactly 2 years ago. Gabriel staggered back, bumping into the heavy dining table. He dropped the phone onto the linen cloth. "He's alive," Gabriel whispered, the realization shattering his carefully constructed reality. He survived the hit. He's been alive this whole time. Gabriel looked at Clara, his eyes scanning her face, looking for deception, but finding only raw, matching grief. "You said he disappeared a year ago," Gabriel pressed, all the aggression draining out of him, replaced by a desperate, frantic need for answers. "Tell me exactly what happened. Leave nothing out. If you miss a single detail, it will cost you your life." Clara swallowed hard, wiping her cheeks with the back of her trembling hand. "It was November 14th. We were supposed to go to dinner. I came home from my shift here, and our apartment was ransacked, tipped over furniture, shattered glass. But there was no blood." Gabriel's eyes darkened. "Who took him?" "I don't know," Clara sobbed. "The police said he probably just ran out on me. But I found this locket hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the bedroom. He had shown it to me once, said it was a family heirloom. Inside the locket, behind the photo." Clara pointed a shaking finger at the jewelry still resting in Gabriel's large palm. "Pop the picture out. There's a piece of paper behind it." Gabriel instantly pressed his thumb against the tiny portrait, sliding it out of the silver frame. A tiny, tightly folded square of tracing paper fell into his hand. He unfolded it with agonizing care. It wasn't a love note. It was a sequence of numbers, followed by a single, terrifying phrase written in Italian. Gabriel read the words, and the air in the room seemed to turn to ice. He looked up at Clara, his expression shifting from a grieving brother back into the apex predator of the Chicago underworld. "Do you know what this says?" he asked quietly. Clara shook her head. "I don't speak Italian." Gabriel folded the paper. "It says, 'The traitor sits at my right hand. Trust no one but the girl.'" He slowly turned his head, his piercing gaze locking onto Dominic, his second-in-command, the man who had been sitting at his right hand for the past 5 years. The man who had supposedly confirmed Matteo's death in the bombing. The tension in the room snapped like a high-tension wire. Silence choked the air in the private dining room of the Sterling Cut. It wasn't just a quiet room. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness that immediately precedes a catastrophic act of violence. The faint, melodic bass line of a jazz saxophone from the main dining area seemed to bleed through the flocked wallpaper, a surreal soundtrack to the deadly tableau unfolding at table 88. Gabriel Russo stood perfectly still, the delicate, tarnished silver locket clutched in his left hand, the tiny square of tracing paper held pinched between the thumb and forefinger of his right. His storm-grey eyes were locked onto Dominic Gallagher. Dominic, a man whose sheer physical mass and brutal reputation had made him the most feared enforcer in the Midwest Syndicate, sat frozen. He was a veteran of the Chicago underworld, a man who had survived gang wars in the gritty streets of the South Side and high-stakes betrayals in penthouses overlooking Lake Michigan. But in that singular moment, beneath the ambient glow of the crystal chandelier, a single bead of sweat broke out at his hairline and began a slow, agonizing descent down his scarred neck. "Boss," Dominic started, his voice a gravelly rumble that attempted to project calm. He held his hands up, palms facing outward in a gesture of surrender. "Whatever that piece of paper says, you know Mateo was paranoid at the end. The kid was seeing ghosts before the bombing even happened. He was using. He was completely clean, Dom," Gabriel replied. The sheer lack of emotion in Gabriel's voice was more terrifying than if he had been screaming. "I know this because I had him tested every week. And this isn't the rambling of a paranoid addict. This is a cipher. A very specific, very old family cipher that my father taught Mateo and me when we were boys. Nobody else knew it. Nobody." Clara remained pressed against the mahogany wainscoting, her breath hitching in her throat. Her mind was a chaotic whirlwind of shock and terror. Theo is alive. Theo is Mateo. The man I loved is part of the Mafia. The revelations hit her like physical blows, leaving her dizzy and disoriented. Yet, beneath the paralyzing fear, a tiny, fierce spark of hope ignited in her chest. He was alive. "Gabe, listen to yourself," Dominic pushed back, slowly shifting his weight in the heavy leather dining chair. His eyes darted nervously to the other three men in the room, loyal soldiers named Vincent, Leo, and Brown. "I was there. I pulled you back from the wreckage on Lower Wacker Drive. We buried an empty casket because there was nothing left to bury. This girl..." Dominic shot a venomous, calculating glare at Clara. "She's a plant, a set-up by the Rossi family. They hired a cheap waitress to feed you a ghost story and tear this syndicate apart from the inside." Gabriel didn't blink. He took one slow, deliberate step toward Dominic. "The note," Gabriel said softly, "was hidden behind a photograph taken 3 years after the explosion. A photograph on a phone with encrypted, verifiable digital timestamps. A phone belonging to a girl who works double shifts just to pay off her dead mother's medical debt at Rush University Medical Center. I know her background because I had Henrik run background checks on every single employee in this building." Gabriel stopped at the edge of the table. "You told me you verified the dental records, Dominic. You told me the medical examiner on the payroll confirmed it was Mateo in that car." "It was him," Dominic roared, his facade finally cracking, slamming his massive fist onto the table, rattling the crystal water glasses. "Then explain to me," Gabriel whispered, his voice slicing through the tension like a razor blade. "Why the account numbers scribbled beneath my brother's warning match, the offshore holding accounts in the Cayman Islands that you claimed were seized by the feds last year?" The absolute confirmation of betrayal hung in the air for a fraction of a second. Then, hell broke loose. Dominic didn't try to talk his way out anymore. With a roar of pure, desperate rage, he kicked the heavy oak dining table upward with both feet. The table, laden with imported wine, heavy silverware, and burning candles, flipped violently backward toward Gabriel and the other men. At the exact same moment, Dominic's hand blurred toward his waistband. He drew a suppressed Glock 19. "Gun!" Leo shouted, diving to the side. Gabriel moved with a terrifying, liquid speed that belied his composed exterior. He didn't dive for cover. He lunged sideways, his arm wrapping around Clara's waist like a vice, yanking her off her feet and dragging her behind the solid, reinforced oak of a serving credenza, just as the first shot shattered to the silence. "Twip!" Thwip! The suppressed bullets tore through the flocking on the wall exactly where Clara's head had been a millisecond prior. Glass rained down around them as a stray bullet shattered the vintage mirrors lining the back of the room. Clara screamed, slapping her hands over her ears as the deafening, unsuppressed roar of Vincent and Brown's weapons returned fire. The private dining room, previously a sanctuary of expensive cigars and quiet power, was instantly transformed into a war zone of flying splinters, shattered crystal, and the pungent, stinging smell of cordite. "Stay down!" Gabriel barked over the chaos, pressing his hand heavily onto the back of Clara's head, shielding her body with his own tailored suit. "Do not move an inch." Through the haze of smoke and falling debris, Gabriel drew his own weapon from his shoulder holster. He peeked over the edge of the credenza. Dominic had used the flipped table as a momentary shield, laying down suppressive fire that pinned the loyal soldiers behind the doorway. Vincent was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his white shirt, though he was still firing blindly. With a violent kick, Dominic shattered the heavy reinforced glass of the private emergency exit that led out into the alleyway behind the Sterling Cut. "He's running!" Brown yelled, preparing to break cover and chase him into the darkness. "Hold your fire!" Gabriel commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Let him go!" Brown stopped, lowering his weapon, staring at his boss in disbelief. "Boss, he's getting away. He's the one who took Matteo. If you chase him into that alley, he will kill you, and we lose our only connection to my brother," Gabriel said, standing up slowly, his eyes scanning the destroyed room. He holstered his weapon and turned his gaze down to Clara, who was curled into a tight ball on the floor, trembling violently, covered in a dusting of shattered glass. Gabriel knelt beside her. The cold, ruthless Mafia Don was gone, replaced by a man looking at the only lifeline he had left to his own flesh and blood. He brushed a piece of glass out of her hair with surprising gentleness. "Clara," he said, waiting until her terrified, tear-filled eyes met his. Dominic faked the bombing. He sold out his own blood for money and power, and when he realized Matteo survived, he hunted him down. That means Dominic is the only one who knows where he is holding him. Clara swallowed hard, her throat burning. Why didn't he just kill him? Because Matteo is the only one who holds the biometric keys to our father's legacy accounts. Dominic needs him alive to bleed the funds dry, Gabriel explained, his jaw setting into a hard line. And Dominic just saw you. He knows that you hold the cipher. He knows that you are the key to tearing his entire empire down. Gabriel stood up, offering his large hand to her. "Your life as a waitress is over," Gabriel stated, a somber truth hanging heavily in his words. "As of this second, you are the most valuable target in Chicago. You are coming with me, and we are going to find the man you call Theo. Together." Clara looked at his outstretched hand. She was terrified, out of her depth, and surrounded by heavily armed criminals. But she thought of Theo's crooked smile, the way he laughed, and the fact that he was out there, somewhere, waiting for her. She wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and placed her hand firmly in Gabriel's. "Okay," Clara said, her voice shaking but her resolve hardening. "Let's go find him." Adrenaline still surged through Clara's veins, making her fingertips numb as the black, armored Cadillac Escalade tore through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago. The city flashed by in a blur of neon and shadow. They had abandoned the restaurant through a subterranean parking garage, moving with a practiced, terrifying efficiency that proved this was a world entirely built on the anticipation of violence. They bypassed Gabriel's known estates and headed straight for the Gold Coast. The vehicle slipped into an underground private loading dock beneath a towering, unmarked high-rise overlooking the churning, black waters of Lake Michigan. Gabriel didn't speak during the ride. He sat in the captain's chair across from Clara, his eyes dark and brooding, staring out the tinted window as the city lights washed over his sharp features. He was simultaneously mourning a betrayal and processing the resurrection of his brother. They took a private elevator that bypassed the lobby entirely, opening directly into a sprawling, hyper-modern penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, dizzying view of the storm rolling in over the lake. The apartment was stripped of warmth, lots of slate, steel, and black leather. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress. "Brown, get a perimeter established," Gabriel ordered as soon as the doors parted. "I want eyes on all traffic cameras within a 10-block radius. Hack into the city grid if you have to. Leo, call Dr. Aris. Have him on standby. And freeze every known account tied to Dominic Gallagher. All of them." "Already on it, boss," Brown replied, moving swiftly toward a bank of computer monitors set up in a recessed office area. Gabriel turned to Clara. She was still shivering, standing awkwardly in her torn, blood-flecked waitress uniform. "Down the hall, first door on the left," Gabriel said, his tone softening slightly. "There's a bathroom. Take a shower. Wash the glass out of your hair. There are clean clothes in the closet. They belong to my sister. They should fit you. Take 10 minutes, then come out here. We have work to do." Clara nodded silently. She welcomed the isolation of the bathroom. Standing under the scalding hot water, she finally allowed herself to break down. She cried for the simple life she had lost. She cried for the terror of the gunshot ringing in her ears. But mostly, she cried out of sheer, overwhelming relief. He is alive. Matteo. Theo. She clung to that truth like a life raft in a hurricane. When she emerged 20 minutes later, dressed in an oversized cashmere sweater and thick sweatpants, she felt a profound shift within herself. The initial shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard ember of determination. These men, Dominic and his corrupt crew, had broken into her home. They had stolen the mum she loved. They had forced her to live in agonizing grief for a year while she drowned in debt. She was done being a victim. She walked into the main living area. Gabriel was standing over a massive glass dining table, heavily illuminated by overhead track lighting. Spread across the glass were architectural blueprints, financial ledgers, and a massive map of the greater Chicago area. In the center of it all lay the tiny, crumpled piece of tracing paper and her broken silver locket. Gabriel looked up as she approached. He had discarded his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his black dress shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and intricate, dark tattoos. He pushed a heavy crystal tumbler across the glass toward her. It contained 2 fingers of amber liquid. "Macallan 18, Gabriel said. "Drink it. It will help with the remaining shock." Clara took a sip. It burned like liquid fire sliding down her throat, but it settled the lingering tremors in her stomach. She set the glass down and leaned over the table, looking at the map. "What are we looking at?" Clara asked, her voice steady. Gabriel raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her composure. He had expected a hysterical, weeping civilian. Instead, he was looking at a woman rapidly adapting to a hostile environment. "We are tracking a ghost," Gabriel said, tapping the map. "Dominic had a year to hide my brother. He wouldn't keep him in the city. It's too risky. Our family has eyes everywhere from the South Loop to Evanston. He would need a place that is entirely off the books." Gabriel pointed to the sequence of numbers on the tracing paper. "Before Matteo was taken from your apartment, he managed to hide this. These numbers aren't coordinates. They're a routing sequence and a date. It points to a private vault registered under a shell corporation at the Northern Trust building on LaSalle Street. "So we go to the vault?" Clara asked. "We can't," Gabriel replied in frustration, running a hand through his dark hair. "The vault requires dual biometric authentication. Matteo set it up so that it could only be opened by him or by me. But Dominic froze the assets internally. If I walk into that bank, Dominic's men inside the financial sector will trigger a silent alarm. It's a trap." Clara stared at the map, her mind racing back to the last few months she spent with Theo. She thought about his habits, his fears, the subtle clues he had dropped without her even realizing it. "He was terrified of the water," Clara murmured, almost to herself. Gabriel looked at her sharply. "Matteo. Matteo grew up sailing on Lake Michigan. He loved the water." "Not when he was with me," Clara insisted, looking up at Gabriel. "The last 3 months before he disappeared. He changed. He couldn't sleep. He stopped taking the train that went over the river. We were supposed to go to a friend's wedding at a yacht club in Racine, and he had a full-blown panic attack. He said—" Clara closed her eyes, trying to recall the exact words. "He said, 'The damp cold rots you from the inside out. I can't go back in the dark.'" Gabriel went incredibly still. His eyes widened slightly as the pieces snapped together in his mind. "The damp cold," Gabriel whispered. He turned back to the map, his eyes scanning the coastline, moving away from the city center, trailing up toward the desolate industrial sectors of the northern shore. "Brown!" Gabriel shouted. The hacker practically jumped out of his chair. "Pull up the property records for the old shipping warehouses in Waukegan, specifically the ones owned by the Gallagher family's legitimate shell companies. Look for anything with sub-level access to the water." "You think Dominic has him in a flooded basement?" Clara asked, a fresh wave of horror washing over her. "Dominic is arrogant," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a lethal, venomous register. "He likes to keep his prizes close, but hidden in plain sight. An abandoned, subterranean shipping lock in an industrial zone. It's perfectly isolated. It's damp. It's dark." Brown's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Boss, I got a hit. A subsidiary of Gallagher Logistics purchased an abandoned naval holding facility right on the waterfront in Waukegan 14 months ago. Energy grid shows 0 power usage, but the water meters have been quietly running for a year." Gabriel looked at Clara. A dark, terrifying smile touched the corners of his mouth. The aura of the feared Mafia boss returned in full force, an apex predator who had just caught the scent of blood. "You did it, Clara," Gabriel said quietly. "You found him." He turned away from the table, grabbing his suit jacket and pulling a fresh magazine for his sidearm from a duffel bag on the floor. "Leo, armor up. Tell the men we leave in 5 minutes. We are going to war." Clara watched him prepare for violence. A normal person would have stayed behind in the safety of the penthouse. A normal person would have let the monsters fight it out in the dark. But Clara looked at her broken locket on the table. She picked it up, feeling the cold silver against her palm. "I'm coming with you," Clara stated, her voice echoing clearly across the room. Gabriel stopped, turning to look at her. "Absolutely not. You are staying here behind reinforced steel and armed guards." "He is my fiancé," Clara said, stepping toward him, refusing to back down from the intimidation radiating off the Mafia boss. "Dominic ruined my life. He took a year of my life away from me. I am not sitting in a tower while you go get him." Gabriel stared down at her, searching her eyes. He was looking for hesitation, for weakness. He found neither. What he saw was a reflection of the hard karma his family built their empire on, the undeniable, righteous fury of the underdog who had finally had enough. A quiet noise of respect escaped Gabriel's chest. He reached into his duffel bag, pulled out a lightweight Kevlar tactical vest, and tossed it to her. "Put it on," Gabriel commanded. "And stay right behind me." The drive north on the Amstutz Expressway was a masterclass in suffocating silence. The armored Cadillac tore through the sheets of freezing October rain, its heavy tires hissing against the cracked asphalt. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was thick with the metallic scent of gun oil and the heavy, unspoken weight of impending violence. Clara sat rigid in the back seat, the heavy Kevlar vest pressing uncomfortably against her chest. She felt like an imposter in a world of wolves. Across from her, Gabriel Russo was methodically checking the action of an M4 carbine. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying focus. He wasn't just a grieving brother anymore. He was the undisputed king of the Chicago underworld, moving to reclaim his blood. "We are 3 miles out from the Old O'Rourke Industrial Dry Docks," Brown announced from the front passenger seat, his face illuminated by the blue glow of a ruggedized tactical laptop. Dominic bought the property under a shell corp linked to Alderman Richard Dempsey, a corrupt city official on his payroll. The grid shows the main warehouse is completely dead, but there's a localized power draw coming from the subterranean pump station. It's an old naval lock, right on the water. Thick concrete. No cell service. No radio frequency. "He's buried him alive," Gabriel murmured, his jaw muscles flexing violently. "Leo, Vincent, we go in quiet. Suppressors on. Night vision. If you see Dominic's men, you do not hesitate. You put them down. Dominic is mine." The Escalade veered off the main road, killing its headlights as it rolled down a muddy, overgrown access path lined with rusted shipping containers and towering cranes that looked like skeletal sentinels in the downpour. The lake was a churning, violent expanse of black water crashing against the decaying concrete bulkheads. Gabriel parked the vehicle behind a massive stack of rotting timber. He turned to Clara, his grey eyes locking onto hers in the darkness. "Stay exactly 2 paces behind me," Gabriel instructed, his voice a low, commanding rumble. "Step where I step. If shooting starts, you drop to the floor and you do not move until I call your name. Do you understand?" Clara swallowed the lump of sheer terror in her throat and nodded. "I understand." They moved out into the freezing rain. The wind howled off Lake Michigan, whipping Clara's soaked hair across her face. Gabriel and his men moved with a terrifying, liquid grace, their weapons raised, their footsteps completely silent over the muddy gravel. Clara forced herself to match their rhythm, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They reached the side entrance of the main warehouse. A heavy steel door rusted at the hinges. Leo stepped forward, producing a set of lockpicks. Within 10 seconds, the heavy tumbler clicked, and the door swung open with a faint groan. The interior of the dry dock was a cavernous void of shadows and decaying industrial equipment. The air smelled of stagnant water, rust, and ozone. Gabriel raised a closed fist, signaling the men to halt. He pointed down a flight of concrete stairs that descended into the pitch-black belly of the facility. A faint, flickering yellow light pulsed from the bottom. The damp cold rots you from the inside out. Theo's words echoed in Clara's mind, making her stomach twist into a painful knot. This was his nightmare. Gabriel took the lead, descending the stairs with lethal precision. As they reached the subterranean level, the sound of rushing water echoed through the concrete corridors. The lock was partially flooded, with a metal-grated walkway suspended over a deep channel of dark, swirling lake water. 2 of Dominic's men were standing guard at the end of the walkway, smoking cigarettes and clutching automatic rifles. They never even heard the Reaper coming. Thwip, thwip. Gabriel and Vincent fired simultaneously. The suppressed rounds found their marks with brutal efficiency. The guards dropped to the grated floor without a sound, their cigarettes hissing as they rolled into the dark water below. Clara clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle a gasp. She stepped over the bodies, her boots slipping slightly on the slick metal, her eyes fixed on the heavy, reinforced steel door at the end of the corridor. Gabriel approached the door. He didn't bother checking if it was locked. He placed a small, square, breaching charge against the heavy locking mechanism, grabbed Clara by the shoulder, and pulled her behind the thick concrete wall of the corridor. "Breaching," Gabriel whispered. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space. The heavy steel door blew inward off its hinges, crashing onto the flooded concrete floor inside. Gabriel spun around the corner, his carbine raised, stepping into the glaring white light of the subterranean vault. Clara followed right behind him, her breath hitching in her throat as she took in the horrific scene before her. It was a cavernous, flooded pump room. Chains hung from the ceiling, and there, strapped to a heavy steel chair, bolted to the floor, was the man she loved. He looked devastatingly different from the soft-spoken bookstore clerk she had lived with. He was emaciated, his face covered in bruises and cuts. His dark hair, exactly like Gabriel's, was matted with sweat and blood. But as his swollen eyes fluttered open against the harsh light, they locked on to Clara. "Clara," Matteo croaked, his voice raw and broken. "Theo!" Clara screamed, stepping out from behind Gabriel, tears instantly blurring her vision. "Don't take another step, sweetheart." A booming, arrogant voice echoed through the chamber. From the shadows behind the industrial water pumps, Dominic emerged. He was bleeding from the shoulder where Vincent had clipped him back at the restaurant, but he was holding a massive silver revolver. And he had the barrel pressed directly against the back of Matteo's head. "Drop the rifles, Gabe!" Dominic roared, his face twisted into an ugly, desperate sneer. "Drop them right now, or I paint this concrete with your brother's brains!" Gabriel froze. His finger hovered over the trigger of his M4. He had the shot, but the margin of error was 0. If he missed by a fraction of an inch, Matteo would die. "It's over, Dom," Gabriel said, his voice cold and terrifyingly calm, despite the inferno of rage burning in his eyes. "The perimeter is secured. The accounts are frozen. Alderman Dempsey is already singing to my lawyers. You have nowhere left to run." "I don't need to run," Dominic laughed, a manic, unhinged sound that echoed off the damp walls. "I just need the biometric key. I kept this little rat alive for a year, bleeding him for the routing numbers, and all he had to do was give me the retina scan. But he wouldn't break. So, I figured, let's bring the one thing he actually cares about." Dominic shifted his cruel gaze to Clara. "The little waitress, the nobody. I tracked him to your apartment a year ago. I realized he was hiding in plain sight, playing house with a broke girl drowning in her dead mother's medical bills. It was pathetic." Clara stood frozen, her hands trembling. Dominic yanked Matteo's head back by his hair, making the bruised man groan in agony. "You're going to open the offshore ledger right now, Matteo, or I'm going to shoot the girl in the stomach and make you watch her drown in this dirty water." Gabriel slowly, deliberately, lowered his rifle to the floor. "Let her go, Dom. This is between us. She has nothing to do with the syndicate." "Oh, she has everything to do with it now," Dominic spat, cocking the hammer of the heavy revolver. "Because she's the leverage. Now kick the guns away." Clara stood in the harsh, flickering light of the subterranean pump room, staring at the man who had shattered her life. Dominic Gallagher was massive, arrogant, and drunk on the illusion of his own power. He looked at Clara not as a human being, but as a pawn, an insect to be crushed. He fundamentally underestimated her. He didn't know that for 3 years, Clara had survived the brutal, demanding ecosystem of high-end dining by anticipating every disaster before it happened. He didn't know that she had spent the last year surviving the crushing weight of poverty and grief through sheer, unbreakable grit. As Dominic gloated, his eyes fixed on Gabriel, Clara's gaze frantically swept the industrial room. She noticed something Dominic had completely overlooked in his arrogant monologue. Just 2 feet to Dominic's right, bolted to the rusting wall, was a massive, red, cast-iron lever. It was the emergency manual release for the subterranean lock's high-pressure steam valves, designed to vent the massive boilers instantly in case of a system failure. The pressure gauge above it was buried in the red zone. Dominic was standing right in the blow-off path. Clara didn't have a gun. She didn't have tactical training, but she had the element of complete and utter surprise, and she had a burning, righteous fury that eclipsed her fear. "You think you're so smart," Clara said, her voice suddenly echoing clearly across the water. She stepped away from Gabriel, moving slowly to her right, drawing Dominic's furious gaze. "Shut your mouth, little girl," Dominic snapped, shifting his weapon slightly toward her. "You spent a year torturing the man I love," Clara continued, her voice rising, ignoring the gun pointed at her. "You thought you could just take him. You thought because I poured your water and cleared your plates that I was nothing." "Clara, stop," Gabriel warned in a harsh whisper, realizing she was deliberately drawing Dominic's fire. "I am the one who brought him here, Dominic," Clara shouted, her eyes blazing with an intense, fierce light. "I am the one who decoded the cipher. I am the one who tore down your empire in less than 3 hours." Dominic's face flushed purple with rage. His ego couldn't handle the disrespect from a civilian. He stepped away from Matteo, raising the heavy revolver directly at Clara's chest. "I'm going to blow a hole straight through." He never finished the sentence. In the fraction of a second that Dominic stepped away from Matteo, Clara lunged. She didn't lunge at Dominic. She dove behind the rusted steel of a massive industrial water pump, her hand shooting out to grab a heavy, discarded metal pipe lying on the grated floor. With a scream of pure adrenaline, she swung the pipe not at the mobster, but violently upward, smashing it directly into the heavy cast-iron locking mechanism of the emergency steam valve on the wall. The ancient, rusted safety pin sheared off instantly. The lever slammed downward. With a deafening, unearthly screech, the high-pressure valve blew. A geyser of scalding, blinding, white steam erupted from the pipe directly into Dominic's face. Dominic screamed in absolute agony, dropping the revolver as the 200-degree steam instantly blistered his skin. He stumbled backward blindly, thrashing wildly at his eyes. The moment the gun dropped, Gabriel moved. He didn't bother picking up his rifle. He closed the 20-foot gap between them in a heartbeat, drawing his heavy tactical combat knife from his chest rig. Dominic staggered out of the steam cloud, blind and screaming. Gabriel grabbed him by the throat, slamming the massive traitor backward against the concrete wall with bone-shattering force. "This is for my father," Gabriel snarled, his voice a demonic whisper over the hiss of the steam. "And this is for my brother." Gabriel drove the blade upward. It was a precise, lethal, brutal strike. Dominic's eyes widened in shock. The arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by the ultimate realization that his karma had finally caught up to him. He slumped forward, completely dead, before his body even hit the flooded concrete floor. The pump room plunged into a heavy, ringing silence, save for the hissing steam and the rushing water. Gabriel stood over the body for a long moment, his chest heaving. Then he dropped the knife and turned, sprinting toward the metal chair. Clara was already there. She had scrambled over the wet concrete, dropping to her knees beside Matteo. She frantically tore at the heavy leather straps binding his wrists, sobbing uncontrollably. "Theo," "Theo, I'm here. I'm right here," she cried, cradling his bruised face in her hands. Matteo looked up at her, his dark eyes brimming with tears. He leaned his forehead against hers, taking a ragged, agonizing breath. "You kept the locket," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I kept everything," Clara sobbed, pressing a desperate kiss to his forehead. "I never stopped looking for you." Gabriel fell to his knees beside the chair, his hands hovering over his brother, as if afraid he was an illusion that might shatter. For the first time in his life, the ruthless, undisputed king of the Midwest Syndicate broke down. He grabbed Matteo by the back of the neck and pulled him into a crushing embrace, burying his face in his brother's shoulder. "I thought I buried you," Gabriel choked out, tears mixing with the rain and blood on his face. "I thought you were gone." "I tried to come back, Gabe," Matteo wept, clutching his older brother. "After the car bomb, I woke up in an alley in Logan Square. I couldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember the family. For 2 years, I was just Theo. I was happy. And then, the memories started bleeding back. I remembered Dominic planting the bomb. I knew he was close to you. I knew if I came out of hiding before I secured the offshore ledgers, he would kill us both." Matteo looked at Clara, his eyes filled with absolute adoration. "I was trying to get the money to disappear with her, but Dominic's men found me first." Gabriel pulled back, wiping his eyes, a profound look of respect settling over his sharp features as he looked at the young woman kneeling in the dirt. "She saved you," Gabriel said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at Clara, the waitress who had accidentally shattered his world and subsequently pieced it back together. "She brought me to you. She distracted him. She is the bravest person I have ever met." Gabriel reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy platinum ring bearing the Russo family crest. It was the ring of the underboss, the second in command. He pressed it into Matteo's bruised hand. "Let's go home, brother," Gabriel said softly. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere at the Sterling Cut was identical to the night the locket dropped. Yet everything had changed. The jazz music played softly. The crystal gleamed under the chandeliers. But Clara Jenkins was no longer wearing a crisp white apron. She was sitting in the private dining room at table 88. She wore a breathtaking, tailored emerald green silk dress. Around her neck, fixed by a master jeweler and gleaming brilliantly, was the antique silver locket. Sitting to her right was Matteo, looking healthy, handsome, and completely devoted, holding her hand under the table. Sitting at the head of the table was Gabriel Russo. He raised a glass of imported Barolo wine. The remaining capos of the syndicate raised their glasses in unison. "To family," Gabriel said, his grey eyes locking onto Clara with a look of absolute, unyielding respect. "To the ones who fight for us in the dark. And to Clara, who proved that true power doesn't come from a gun. It comes from the heart." "To Clara," the men echoed in a low, rumbling chorus. Clara smiled, taking a sip of the expensive wine. She had paid off her mother's medical debt in full the very next day. She had her life back. She had her love back. The waitress was gone. The queen of the Russo syndicate had taken her seat. And as she looked around the table at the most dangerous men in the city, she knew one thing for certain. They would never underestimate her again. What an absolutely incredible journey. From a broken necklace on a restaurant floor to taking down the biggest traitor in the Chicago underworld. Clara proved that you should never underestimate the underdog, using the very environment against Dominic to secure her hard karma victory and save the man she loves. She went from drowning in debt to sitting at the head of the table. If your heart was pounding as hard as mine during that steam valve scene, you need to hit that like button right now. Did you expect Clara to be the one to finally take Dominic down? Let me know your favorite twist in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with anyone who loves a powerful, romantic, and pulse-pounding mafia story. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next dramatic storytelling adventure.